Hello everyone, welcome to a very special episode of the cEDH cast. Today we're going to be discussing the changes to the decklist database on September 8th. I know that was a couple weeks ago, but it's definitely an interesting topic and it has a lot of interesting information about the direction the format is moving in and what decks are popular. So I'm going to just jump right into it and start with the list of decks that were accepted to the decklist database. So first we have Yawgmoth, Undying Combo, Nethroid Protein Cat, Ecrocrom Turbonaws, which has two lists, Grenzo Doomsday, Noda Stacks, Kel's Consult, Kel's is the commander from Jumpstart, Corvold Turbonaws, which also has two lists, Thrasios Crom Control, which also has two lists, Kenrith Hermit Druid, Tawnos Control, and that's the end of it. Tawnos Control is notably related to the Tawnos deck, which won the Forge competition this summer. So if you remember that, that's likely what it's based off of. Additionally, we have a whole bunch of new additional deck lists, including Snoop Cemetery, Keenan's House of Mirrors, Neo Razakats, Turbo Keenan, Thrasios Vile Oracle, Revolution, Bad Angie, Kenrith Consult Muse, Croxoplasm Control, Tide Pod Challenge, which is the Urza Polytyrant deck, and a Layered Kiki Timna Tana Snoop deck. So there's a whole bunch of other ones too, but those are the ones that I thought were especially interesting. And finally, a few decks got moved to outdated, specifically alternative lists. You may notice some of the alternative lists have been moved to outdated from commanders like Teferi, Brago, Grand Arbiter Augustine IV, Vanifar, Cast Storm, Elsha, Corvold, and Tassiger. A lot of those commanders haven't been very popular lately, so it makes sense that some of the alternative lists haven't been updated as much as you'd expect. Additionally, Baral Control and Scion of the Ur-Dragon Reanimator have finally been removed from the decklist database. I think that's correct. Both of those lists are not really indicative of what the format is like. And finally, we have three categories which have been merged or created. Scepter Thrasios and Midrange TNT Consultation have been combined into Timna Thrasios Midrange, which makes a lot of sense. The decks have really moved away from the diverse Timna Thrasios good stuff piles that we saw in the past, and they're starting to become streamlined again now that there's a more aggressive meta that has less room for value engines. So instead of maybe picking creature-based value engines and going super deep on that, now it makes more sense to play like something like Scepter or something a bit more streamlined. We also have Razakats and Consult Raz of Thrasios being combined into a single archetype, and Kenrith Midrange, which is the Kenrith Evolution category. And that's the end of the actual changes to the decklist database. I think notably, Corvold Turbonaws and Ecrocrom Turbonaws, both having two lists, definitely means that we're going to see a bit of the impact in the actual cEDH staples. I know that we see Rite of Flame. That's like a very popular Turbonaws card, so things like that are definitely going to be popping up. So let's just jump into the list of things that happen to the cEDH staples list. So if you don't know what the cEDH staples list it's a list of cards that show up in 10 or more decks on the decklist database and aren't commanders. So you're not going to see Thrasios here, but you're not going to see like a Najeela or Crom, but you'll see a Miscast. So pulling up Miscast just hopped on the list for the very first time with 23 entries. So it's basically 23 entries is a lot. It's twice the entry minimum. So clearly a very popular card. Huge impact on the format. So glad to see M21 bringing, a few staples in. Additionally, we have Peer into the Abyss, which has 15 entries. This is also Peer into the Abyss's first time on the staples list because it came out in M21. Peer into the Abyss is a really popular deck, really popular card in these Turbonaws decks. Additionally, it's like a second copy of Ad Nauseam in decks that aren't even really that Turbonaws. If you think you want two copies of Ad Nauseam, Peer into the Abyss is really, really similar to that, possibly even more powerful. So I'll pull that up. I forgot to do the slide. So yeah, that's Peer into the Abyss. Peer into the Abyss, if you're not familiar with the card, is 4 black, black, black. Target player draws cards equal to half their number of cards in their library and then loses half their life, and then you round up each time. So, a very powerful card. Next, we have Dockside Extortionist. It's a goblin pirate for 1 and a red. When it enters the battlefield, you create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. Dockside is now in, well, I don't have the exact number, but it's up 11 inclusions, so that card is just becoming even more popular. Any red deck getting added to this list is probably on Dockside. I'd be shocked to hear it wasn't. It'd have to be like a, like a polymorph deck. Really, that's the only reason I could possibly imagine not running Dockside. So, anytime you see a red deck on the list, it's probably going to add the number of inclusions Dockside is in. So, Dockside's truly a staple. It's one of the best cards in the format. Next up is Kiki Jiki, first time on the list. Kiki Jiki is 2 red, red, red for a legendary Goblin Shaman. Has haste, and you can tap it to create a token of a creature you control that is not legendary. It has haste, and then you sacrifice it to be in the next end step. Kiki Jiki is now at 10 entries, so it just cracked into the staples list. It shows up in exactly 10 decks, and one of the reasons it's become so much more popular is because of the inclusion of the Snoop, which is a 1-card combo with Kiki Jiki and Goblin Recruiter. So both of those cards have been seeing a lot more popularity, but it seems like they're just below the barrier because Kiki Jiki also shows up in twin decks, which aren't very popular. There might not even be any on the DDB, but it also shows up in pod decks that aren't on the Snoop combo. So Kiki Jiki is just barely cracking into the top 10, but I expect to see it getting more inclusions and eventually seeing the Snoop combo in its entirety showing up on this list. Next, we have Wishclaw Talisman. It's an artifact for 1 and a black. When it enters the battlefield, you put 3 counters on it. You may tap it, pay 1 mana, and remove a counter from it. You search your library for a card, you put it in your hand, and then you give it to an opponent. It'll be tapped when they get it, so they can't use it immediately, and you may only use that ability on your own turn. However, you can use it at instant speed, which is important. So, Wishclaw Talisman is now in another 9 decks, so I'm not exactly sure how many it is total, but it's in an additional 9 decks, which is a pretty big growth. The main source of that is the addition of a whole bunch of blue-black and just black-focused Turbo-Naz decks. So we see like the Corvold decks. Additionally, Wishclaw Talisman works really powerfully with Dockside, where by giving your opponent an artifact, you're actually upping the Dockside count, which makes this basically a demonic tutor for Dockside by the time all is said and done. It can also help you, push through, maybe going from 3 to 4. So in my Corvold deck, I only need to make 4 treasures, then I draw my deck from the draw triggers. So often, I might have 2 or 3 my opponents have. I Praetor's Grasp their Wishclaw, steal their Wishclaw, play their Wishclaw, then Wishclaw tutors my Wishclaw, which I play, then tutor, give to my opponents, tutor up the last combo piece I have, make tons of mana. It's really powerful. It also is like just really nice to have like a card that's a tutor that also kind of enables your combo at the same time. Additionally, it lets you turn your bounce spells into tutors. If you end up, Wishclawing for an Adnaz, then making tons of mana after your Adnaz resolves, and be like, I have all these bounce spells, what am I going to do? Well, you can bounce your Wishclaw, replay it, and tutor something up. Next, we have Phantasmal Image, which is another card that's very popular in the Turbo-Naz decks, but a lot of other decks are also adding this card because it works really well with Dockside and with our opponent's creatures. So Phantasmal Image is an illusion for 1 and a blue, and when it enters the battlefield, you may have it enter as a copy of another creature, except it gains when this creature becomes the target of a spell or ability, sacrifice it. So if they activate an ability that targets Phantasmal Image, like Kenrith, where you can put a counter on a creature, you have to sacrifice your Phantasmal Image. But Phantasmal Image is also a combo piece if you have your own Kenrith, because you can sack the Phantasmal Image, have it re-enter as a copy of Dockside, make infinite copies, and, well, not even copy, do that infinitely, make infinite treasures, and, draw your deck. So Phantasmal Image has actually gotten even more popular, going up 8 decks, which is quite a lot. It's clearly becoming a format staple well, it already is, but it's clearly becoming like a really core part of the format. I think like it's getting up to like Gilded territory where if you're playing blue, you're probably just supposed to play Phantasmal Image. Next, we have Hopagirper. Hopagirper is a legendary artifact creature that costs 1 mana. It has flying, and you may sacrifice it, and until your next turn, target player who is dealt combat damage by Hopagirper cannot cast non-creature spells. So effectively, it's a Tymna attacker and a Silence and a Mox Opal enabler, which does come up. So this card is very strong. It's debuting with exactly 10 entries, so it has exactly enough entries to make it onto the list. And I've seen this deck show up in more and more lists. I'm playing it in my Yuriko deck. I should probably look into playing it in Korvold, although there's Xantid Swarm, which is pretty similar. Maybe I would play Xantid Swarm over Hopagirper, but only just barely. So, quite a powerful card, and it's really nice to see this on the list. It's definitely a card, I think, when this came out, you would not say Hopagirper is going to be a cEDH staple. Definitely cards like Tymna that have come out and other things have enabled this card to really become the staple that now it is. Next up, we have Basalt Monolith. So Basalt Monolith is a very common combo piece, and it is the first of... We're going to be going through the additions to the staples list, so this is the first of the additions to the staples list. Basalt Monolith is a combo piece with Kinnan, with Zerda, with Power Artifact. It's fine as just a rock where you can put 3 mana into it, and then the next turn you can use it to maybe cast like an Ad Nauseam or a Word of Invention or something like that. It's okay. I think it's probably... It's probably overplayed. I think there's just better combos, but, you know, with the power of, like, Neoform and Kinnan and Zerda, I can understand why a lot of the Evolution decks were checking out this card. I'm not sure if they're still playing it, but I'm definitely not hot on it, and I would prefer to have a combo that makes infinite mana of every color, which Dockside does, so. Next we have Deafening Silence. It is a 1 mana enchantment that says each player can't cast more than 1 non-creature spell each turn. So it's a Rule of Law effect, but for 1 mana, which is insane. It sadly does get Mental Misstepped, but the fact that you can play this on turn 1 definitely makes up for it. The downside is that your opponent can still play like their Tymnas and their Thrasioses and start generating tons of value, which is rough. And it also means that an opponent could theoretically go like turn 1, not even turn 1, but on 1 turn like play some rituals or play a Mana Vault or something, and then like play a Crom, which is also kind of medium. Although Crom is not as good when your opponents can only cast 1 non-creature spell each turn. Just an example. So I think Deafening Silence is definitely really powerful. I just think there are a lot of decks it doesn't affect at all. But thankfully, the decks it's really good against are the most popular decks in the format, these aggressive Turbo Nos decks. So definitely a staple. Kind of shocked it only now is on the list. Probably comes from the fact that there's just more 4-color stacks decks people are working on with Snoop and Chulane and Winota. So definitely a lot of stacks decks are starting to develop and, you know, get put onto the decklist database. Next we have Hopagirper. We already talked about this, but the reason I think this is like a new addition is the popularity of this card as a Winota Thopter. It's not a human, while also being extremely popular in Yuriko and Mad Farm and Bad Farm. So it sees a lot of play in a lot of decks where it just needs like this really niche effect where it's like a counter spell that's also a dork. And it does that, so that's why we're seeing it here. Imperial Recruiter. It is a human advisor for 2 red. When it enters the battlefield, you search your library for a creature card with power 2 or less. You reveal it, put it into your hand, and then shuffle your library. So this is really cool with Winota. It allows you to put this into play off a Winota trigger, maybe find your recruiter, and you'll win the game next turn most likely, which is sick. Additionally, this card is super powerful. In any deck that's playing Dockside, it finds Dockside. You can also find maybe like it can find like a Spell Seeker, so you can chain it into things. It can find a Dualcaster Mage, which is a common combo in like mono red decks, like a Godo is often playing that, or you know, it comes up. And finally, it by being able to get so many different creatures, it's a really powerful like toolbox card. So if you're playing in a deck that wants to be tutoring up lots of different toolboxy creatures like a Magus of the Moon or even Mind Sensor, this card definitely is strong. It's definitely something to look at. Is it Signet? A lot of farm stuff, a lot of is it stuff going on, I guess. A lot of Rite of Flames, a lot of negates being cast, I suppose. Geeky Jeeky, we already discussed this. The popularity of Snoop combo is pushing this into the staples list, in addition to just being a popular card in the format already. Life Death. So Life Death is a split card where Life says all lands you control become 1/1 creatures until end of turn, and then Death is Reanimate. So you return target creature from your graveyard to the battlefield, and then you lose life equal to its cost. So Death is very powerful with Villas, where it's just a second copy of Reanimate for 2 mana. And Life is really powerful with Razaketh because you can turn all your lands into tutors really efficiently, and Death obviously can just target Razaketh. So Life and Death is really popular in these like Reanimator decks, especially if you're just looking for huge tutor density, which is what a lot of the Reanimator decks like Corvold are currently looking for. So definitely a really sick card, has tons of text, and it's like a 1 mana. You're paying 1 mana for this, like the fact that you're paying 1 mana for redundancy and also having an amount of like combo potential with Razaketh. So I wouldn't play this over Reanimate, but I definitely think it's up there. Magus of the Moon. Magus of the Moon is a human wizard for 2 and a red. It's a 2/2, so it's a bear. Non-basic lands or mountains, so it's a Blood Moon. This card's really powerful in Stacks decks. It's trying to punish decks like Thrasios and Tymna, where they're just playing like 4 colors, and they're not in red, and they're super greedy on basics. And a lot of their spells are like super color restrictive. Where this card seems to fail, in my opinion, is that a lot of these Turbonaws lists are either 3 colors, so they're playing an amount of basics, even though they do have a Tainted mana base, or they're on Dockside, and they're already on turn 1 tutoring for Dockside before you get this Magus of the Moon out. They slam their Dockside, and it's because it's completely unaffected by Magus, and then they play their Adnaws, and your opponents can't interact because their lands are shut down. So I think Magus of the Moon is kind of awkward. It's super powerful with Winota, where with Winota you can like dig super deep and be like, hey, do I want this right now? Like, you might even have options. So Magus of the Moon, definitely a staple. Great in the Blood Pod decks, great in Winota. Situationally really poor, which is the case for a lot of Stacks pieces. But being on a body means you can always just turn into a Tymna attacker, which is like super important. Or in Winota, it doesn't really do that, but it's free, so who cares? Alright, Miscast, we've already talked about this. The reason it's super popular, though, is because Ad Nauseam is super powerful. And a lot of the other combos in the format are instants or sorceries, so, even if they're playing console, you can't counter the Thassa's Oracle, but you can counter console, which is the most important thing to do there, usually. Additionally, 3 mana is a lot more mana than it used to be, where people would hold up Thrasios activations and try to like grind. Now you're kind of like never in a position to pay 3 mana, and so this counterspell is like really just a counterspell. Alright, Peer into the Abyss. We already talked about this, but it's a new edition and it's really powerful. Very popular in the Turbonaws decks. It does come at a bit of a deck building restriction where you need to be able to win the game once you resolve it, but it's not hard once you've drawn half your deck. Ranger, Captain of Eos. It's a human soldier for 1 white. When it enters the battlefield, you may search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost 1 or less, reveal it, put it into your hand. Then, it also has sacrifice the Ranger, Captain of Eos. Your opponents can't cast non-creature spells this turn. So it's a lot like Hope of Gearfur, another card we saw on the list this update. It's a human soldier, so it's like a silence you can get off Winota. It's a 3 mana dude, so it's pretty easy to cast off a dwarf like a Noble Hierarch or an Avacyn's Pilgrim. It's a tutor, which is like really important in like Heliod, where it tutors up Walking Ballista. It's also protection in Heliod, which is super important. It also a human in Heliod, which I think is a creature type that deck cares about. Might not be. Might be making that up. But it's still very important to be able to just play this like tutor that also is a silence. It's also a body. So this card's really impressive. It has tons of text. The 3/3 body is massive. Anytime you have a 3-for-1, which is really what this is, like it's a silence that's a body that tutors up a creature, it's going to be really, really impressive, and it makes sense that it's a staple in our format. All right, Rite of Flame. It's just a really simple ritual, really popular in the farm decks or the faux farm decks. A lot of decks are sacrificing card quality for speed, and this card is a great example of that. It's like a Elvish, or it's more like a Simian Spirit Guide. You have to pay 1 mana for, and it's a sorcery, but it's still good enough, so it made our list. Spire Garden. A lot of people playing red-green, I've noticed, and I'm a big fan of red-green. You get Temur Sabertooth, you get Dockside, you get all the creature tutors, you get Breach, so I'm really enjoying red-green right now, and you get Dork mana, which is important, so it's one of the reasons I've really been enjoying Corvold. You get Dockside and creature tutors, so Spire Garden being in those colors, it's got up a bit, and I think my Corvold list is on it. I'm sure the other Corvold list is on it. I'm sure most Pod-ish decks are on it, like Blood Pod or Snoop Pod, so not too surprising. Spire of Industry. Spire of Industry is a land which taps for a colorless, but you can also pay 1 life to tap it for any color, but you may only do that if you control an artifact. Spire of Industry is super popular in the blue farm decks. It's a bit of a controversial card, I feel like. You're not always going to have it turn on, but the fact that you can tap for colorless is a huge deal with your ad nauseums. At the same time, being able to cast your ad nauseums is a huge deal, so it really depends on your artifact count, right? If you're playing Mox Opal, you're probably expecting to have enough artifacts that Spire of Industry is a safe pick. Even just often playing like a turn 1 Mana Vault or something means that your Spire of Industry is alive on turn 2 to play a turn 2 Crom, which is really all you can ask for. So I actually don't think this card should really be on this list. I don't think Spire of Industry should be a staple, but it seems enough people disagree that it got there, so congrats. Trinisphere. Now, Trinisphere is the last of our new additions. It's also one of the most oppressive stacks pieces in the format. It's a card that really exaggerates some of the problems that the format has, in my opinion. So a lot of the times when I'm playing, I'll see a turn 1 Trinisphere played right after someone plays a Dork or plays a turn 1 Mana Rock or something like that. And now in turn 3, that player who went before them in turn order can actually cast one of their spells, where the other 2 players, assuming this person's like second in turn order or third, the other players who might have had slower starts or were after them in turn order can't really do anything. They can't progress their game plan at all, which is a problem. It means that they can't play their interaction. It means that they have to be really greedy when it finally does get to them on turn 3, where they pay 3 mana for a Mana Dork, or they tap out for Ristic Study or something like that. Or even a Mystic Remora they pay 3 mana for. So obviously, Trinisphere's insane. It's like one of the best cards in the format as a stacks piece. It's a card I really wish didn't exist, but I'm sure there are a lot of decks in the format that couldn't do what they do without this card existing. Like, if Winota drops a Trinisphere, like, that's it. Good game. Like, turn 1 Dork, turn 2 Trinisphere, turn 3 Winota is going to end the game a lot of the time. I imagine just not being able to interact with anyone, and Winota just being able to start slamming people and putting the combo pieces together, really impressive. I'm talking a lot about Winota because a lot of these cards see play in Winota, and I think Winota being added to the DDB and a lot of the cards that Winota plays pushed a lot of these cards from like the popular but not like staples to like into the staples list. So that's why it's coming up so much. All right, first of our removals, Brawl, Chief of Compliance. Brawl, Chief of Compliance is a... Oh, I should actually just read Trinisphere real quick for those of you listening. Trinisphere just says all spells have to cost 3. So if your spell costs 1 mana, now it costs 3. If it costs 4 mana, still costs 4 mana. Costs 3 mana, costs 3 mana. It's just that simple. So Brawl, Chief of Compliance is a legendary human wizard for 1 in a blue. Instant and sorcery spells cost 1 less to cast, and whenever you counter a spell you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. Brawl is fine with Tymna. Its body is decent. It blocks Tymna's, I guess. It makes your counter spells cheaper. It makes them loot, which is like fine. I'd say my biggest problem with Brawl is that it's not a mana rock and it isn't very explosive, and the body is not important anymore. Not very impressed by this card. Probably shouldn't have ever been a staple. Jace Vryn's Prodigy. This one I feel less bad about. So it's a legendary human wizard as well, for 1 and a blue also. You can tap it to draw a card and then discard a card. If you have 5 more cards in your graveyard, you may flip Jace. When you flip Jace, he becomes a planeswalker with 4 loyalty, and he has a -3 that says you can cast instant sorcery from your graveyard. So Jace is very similar to a Snapcaster Mage, except one of the nice things is that you don't need to spend the 2 mana for Snapcaster Mage that turn. You do the flip when it comes back to your turn. You can also do it at instant speed for some weird blocking shenanigans, but it almost never comes up. So the problem with Jace is that 2 mana value engines are good, but 2 mana value engines that don't create card advantage and aren't really immediate and aren't just kind of busted are already losing popularity. Like, I love Dark Confidant, but Dark Confidant has been losing a lot of popularity in the last few months. Jace doesn't even hold a candle to that card. So I think that it's right that Jace isn't on the staples list, even though I actually do like Jace. I just don't think that it's there anymore. There are some decks where I could see it being powerful enough, but those are very few and far between. So next up is Reap. Reap is one of my favorite cards. It's super fun to play. You always feel like you're getting them. When you get a Forcible and a blue card and you pitch them at instant speed and it's like a 2 mana counterspell, for some reason it feels like you won, even though it's like just okay. The thing is that if people aren't playing Dark Confidant, if that's not good enough, Reap is not good enough. If the bar is so high that permanents like Dark Confidant aren't good enough, that means the cards that are like bad Dark Confidants aren't good enough, and that's when Reap starts to get into questionable territory. So when you see your Mindblade Renders and your Tymnas and your Dark Confidants seeing a lot of play and they're super impactful in the game, that's when Reap is great, because you can always say, hey, you played your Tymna, Reap's alive. Problem is, people are playing their Chroms, and they're not really playing their Tymnas. I mean, they will play Tymna, it's just not at such a consistent rate that on turn 3 you can just always know Reap is going to be live, which is the place that Reap really needs to be as a 2 mana instant. Alright, next is Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace is an enchantment for 1 and a white. When it enters the battlefield, you exile all cards in graveyards, and if a card would be put into your graveyard from anywhere, exile it instead. I love this card. I'm actually shocked to see it removed with the popularity of the Brain Freeze Breach decks that are going on right now. I think it's absolutely incorrect for people to be cutting this card from any mid-range deck. It's possible that mid-range decks just aren't able to play cards like this right now, and if that's the case, I'm not really sure mid-range decks are playable right now, because this is one of the best cards they can play. Maybe it's possible that the best mid-range decks right now are on Breach. That's the other possibility. So I suppose if the mid-range decks of the format are just on Breach because it's such a good combo that it's just better for them to play that card than it is to play Rest in Peace, that's a pretty good answer, I guess. But Rest in Peace is so nuts, I just always want to play it. Alright, Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale. Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale is a legendary land. It says all creatures have at the beginning of your upkeep, sacrifice a creature unless you pay 1. So it's a tax on every creature. It's not that good when people are playing Dark Confidants. I mean, people are still playing Dark Confidant, but if you understand, like, if the arguments are being made that these cards aren't good enough, then the cards that depend on them to be powerful also have to be questioned, and I think that's what's going on with Tabernacle. Additionally, I think there is some bias in the format against these expensive cards, where, and I think about this sometimes too, it's like, I have a Guy's Cradle in my deck. Is this Guy's Cradle better than a basic forest? Marginally? If it's only marginally and super situationally better than a basic forest, should it be in my primer? by being in the primer, it makes the deck more intimidating to play, and part of the reason the primer exists is to make people play the deck. And if people, if the only differentiating factor is, does anyone in your meta play Blood Moon between a Guy's Cradle and a Forest? Maybe I'm just supposed to not play Guy's Cradle in my deck, or at least in the primer, and then in paper play Guy's Cradle. I think Tabernacle has some of that, where people just find reasons not to put Tabernacles in their lists, even if they're kind of supposed to have them. Although, for the most part, I think Tabernacle just isn't that good, and so that many people aren't playing it. Finally, for the removals, we have Word of Invention. X blue, blue, blue. It's an instant with Improvise, which means you can tap your artifacts to pay for it. Kind of. Only the X, though. So if you pay 3 blue and you tap your Winter Orb, you can get a 1-drop. So, or X is 1, I should say. Search your library for an artifact card with converted mana cost X or less. Put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle your library. So this is a minimally 3-mana tutor. Often it's like a 5 or 6-mana tutor. If you look at the cards that are getting cut, a lot of these are like very mid-rangey cards. They're not very explosive cards, and Word of Invention is just kind of, it falls into that too. It's not super explosive. It's a huge getcha where there's some stacks piece in your deck that just shuts down your opponents like that. If it even touches the battlefield, they're dead. Word of Invention on the stack, they forget what it is, and you get them. For example, I've lost to a Word of Invention for 1. They get Pithing Needle. That's it. I lose. And that's going to happen sometimes with cards like this. I do think that at this point people have figured out Word of Invention. A lot of people are in on that trick, and there are not a lot of decks that are trying to tutor out instant speed artifacts, and you have to really be in low colors to play a blue, blue, blue instant, and you have to really... I just don't know where this fits. Where is this going? What decks are playing this? For it to be a staple, right? Artifact combos have to be a staple. They're not really right now, although artifact-based... Dockside is technically artifact-based, but not in the traditional sense. I just don't see we're doing it anymore. There aren't any stacks pieces I'm looking to tutor up into speed, and there's not any combos besides the occasional Isochron Scepter that I'm really going for at this point, so it makes sense to me it's off the list. Finally, we have the returns with Autumn's Veil. Spells you control can't be countered by blue or black spells this turn, and creatures you control can't be the targets of blue or black spells this turn. Autumn's Veil is a different Veil of Summer. It doesn't draw you a card, and it affects you. So you can't rapid hybridization your own Dockside, for example. But it does do some things differently. It changes the rules of the game for the turn instead of giving your creatures hexproof. So if I cast Veil of Summer and then I reanimate a Razaketh, the Razaketh can still be destroyed by rapid hybridization. Where if I play Autumn's Veil and then I reanimate Razaketh, it can't be rapid hybridizationed. So that's the distinction. This card's very powerful. It's a staple. Shocked to see it go. I don't know what people were smoking to take this out of their decks, but thank God it's back. Next we have Quirion Ranger, a card I'm shocked to see as a staple and shocked to see it wasn't. It's a very common combo piece. It says, return a force you control to its owner's hand. You untap target creature. You may only use this ability once each turn. It's an elf that costs 1 mana. Often, this card is a combo piece with cards like Temur Sabertooth or Chulane or now Ashaya from the new Zendikar set. A lot of these decks are not actually very popular, and they're not very strong right now, but they usually have a pretty good representation on the DDB because they're great budget options and players love to play them, and in their metas they're actually pretty good. So kind of surprised to see it go, kind of surprised to see it back. It's kind of a 8 or 9 deck card where I'm not sure where it's supposed to be. I do think, though, with Ashaya now entering the format, this card's going to be on the staples list for some time, just because that combo is very unique and very powerful. Next we have Temur Sabertooth, the last of the returns. Temur Sabertooth is super powerful in these Sands White Dockside combo decks. So If you're playing Vile Smasher Thrasios, you might play Temur Sabertooth and Baron Master Wizard, where if you're in Sans Black, you'll definitely be playing Emil and potentially Baron Master Wizard or one of the other options that are out there. The reason I think Temur Sabertooth is back on the list is because, again, it has a popular combo with Korean Ranger where you can bounce Korean Ranger to your hand over and over again, and the ability to bounce your Dockside infinitely is super powerful. So in decks like Corvold that aren't white, so they don't have access to Emil, and not blue because it doesn't have access to Baron, Temur Sabertooth is a great option, and I think Temur Sabertooth should be a staple. It's really strong. So that is the end of our review of the cEDH decklist database and Playing with Power staples list changes for September 8th, 2020. I thought a lot of the changes made a lot of sense. I think Rest in Peace is the big outlier for me. I think that card is super strong. I think it's something I'm willing to pay 2 mana for, which is a huge deal. It shuts down a lot of the lines that they have on their ad nauseum, so even if they resolve their ad naus after you play Rest in Peace, there's a lot of ad nauses that can't win through a Rest in Peace because, they need to, play Dockside, bounce Dockside, play Dockside, Breach, bounce their Dockside using some of the cards they use to play ad nauseum, and then they brain freeze themselves and win. So I think Rest in Peace probably should stick around. Besides that, I was a little surprised to see Trinisphere not on the list already. That's a pretty powerful card. Same goes to Imperial Recruiter. Imperial Recruiter, super powerful card. Red staple. I think if we're looking at one thing here, a trend, it's that red has become super powerful in the last few months, and so the new additions are just red cards. So we're going to see more and more red decks as people go out and kind of look what the options are, because in the last year, red has gone from the 4th best color to the 2nd or 3rd, maybe 1st best color, depending on what you're looking for from the format. When I say 1st, 2nd, or 3rd, I just mean Dockside might be the best card in the format. Does that make red the best color? I don't think so, but maybe some people would. If you were listening to the top 3 cards in the format, it's possible. Some people may even say it's Dockside, Breach, ad nauseum. Is blue the 3rd best color in the format, or 4th best color in the format then? Probably not, obviously, but it's a matter of perspective, and that's why I say it could be the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th best. So I think, repeating what I said, I think that's why we see so many new red cards, or cards that are commonly found in red decks in the new editions, is because people are just exploring red, because the options have become incredibly alluring, I guess, to deck builders as we realize how powerful the color is. So I hope you all enjoyed this update to the disastrous decklist database episode I put up on Friday. I took that down, and I'm now putting this back up, so I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you have a wonderful day, weekend, night, week, whatever it is. Have a nice one. Thanks.